The first lie I told after finding the letters was small. I said I had plans on Sunday. Lila smiled like it was nothing. Good, she said. You've been working too much. I nodded, even as my chest felt like a door that wouldn't latch. The lie wasn't about where I'd be, it was about what I needed to see. That Sunday morning, I parked a few blocks away from the coffee shop where she always met her friend Clara. Or that's what she said. I'd never checked before. That's the kind of family we were. We took things on faith, because doubt felt like bad manners. From the car, I could see through the big front window of the cafe. Lila sat by the glass, not with Clara, but with a man whose posture had the intimacy of habit. He leaned in when he spoke. She smiled, but not the smile she used at home. This one was softer, unguarded. The kind of smile people forget they're making. It could still be innocent. I told myself that twice. Maybe 3 times. The man reached across the table. His hand brushing hers, barely, but her fingers turned upward to meet it. That was the moment my body betrayed me. My jaw locked. My pulse climbed high into my ears. I watched her laugh, watched her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. Watched a gesture so ordinary become evidence. When she stood, she placed a folded paper into his hand, white, creased like the edges of her letters. He slipped it into his coat pocket. She left the cafe first. I waited until she turned the corner before I started the engine. The man stayed, stirring his coffee long after she was gone. As if delaying the next thing he had to feel. I didn't tell my father. He was at the club that afternoon, half playing tennis, half maintaining whatever peace men his age maintain through ritualized sweating. When he came home, I was in the kitchen pretending to read the news. Lila was making soup. She moved around him easily, still humming something from the car. When he kissed her cheek, she flinched, not enough for him to notice, but enough for me. It was a ripple of awareness, of guilt maybe, or fear. She caught me looking. For half a second, our eyes locked across the kitchen's mild light. Her face didn't change, but I could feel it. The recognition that I had seen something I wasn't meant to. She went back to chopping carrots. The sound of the knife was too precise, too steady. At dinner, my father talked about the club's new coach. Lila nodded in all the right places. I barely tasted the food. Afterward, while my father loaded the dishwasher, Lila and I stood by the counter. The same way we had that day with the peaches. Did you enjoy your day? She asked. Her tone was casual, too casual. Yeah, I said, got a lot done. Good, she said, washing her hands, looking at the sink instead of me. It's nice to have quiet Sundays. Is that what it was for you? I asked, and she froze for less than a second. But it was enough. When she finally looked up, her smile was careful, like a bandage pressed too tight. Why? She asked. I shrugged, just wondering. She studied me, 1 heartbeat, 2. Then she turned off the faucet, dried her hands, and said softly, sometimes wondering hurts more than knowing, Owen. It was the first warning she ever gave me. Sleep became an argument I couldn't win. Each night, I lay there listening to the house breathe. Pipes clicked, wind moved through vents, Lila's footsteps crossed the hallway once, twice. Sometimes 3 times. The next morning, I'd find small differences. A curtain slightly drawn, her desk lamp left on. A faint trace of perfume near the stairs. One night, I followed the sound of her voice. She was in her office, the door half open, talking quietly. Not loud enough to hear words, but the tone, gentle, intimate, was the same one from the cafe. I stood there too long. long enough that when the door creaked and her shadow moved, I had to step back fast. She opened it fully, and for a split second, her face registered the shock of finding me there. "Owen," she said, calm but with a tremor behind it. "Couldn't sleep?" "Water," I said. My throat was dry enough to make it true. She looked at me for a long time, then at the dark hallway beyond. "You should try warm milk," she said softly. The kind of advice that used to sound motherly but now landed like mockery. Behind her, on the desk, I saw the white box again, the one with the red ink letters. Its lid was closed. I wanted to ask if there were new ones inside. I wanted to say, "I saw you." But the words stayed behind my teeth. "Good night," she said. I nodded. "Good night." She closed the door. The lock clicked. I stood there until the hallway felt colder than it should. The next day, my father left for a business trip. Lila drove him to the airport. When she returned, I was in the living room pretending to work. She lingered in the doorway. "It's just you and me this week," she said. There was nothing dangerous in her voice, at least, not on the surface. But beneath it, something trembled. "Yeah," I said. "Guess so." We both knew what was unsaid, that houses change shape when they're only half full. That evening, we ate dinner in near silence. Afterward, she poured wine for herself, tea for me, and sat across the table like someone rehearsing peace. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure. If you found something about me, something that upset you, would you tell me?" I stared at her. The glass stem trembled in her fingers. "I don't know," I said. "Would it change anything if I did?" She smiled faintly, and the smile broke halfway through. "Maybe not, but it would be fair." "I don't think fairness works here," I said. "Then what does?" she asked, quietly. I didn't answer. She looked at me for a long time, and for a second. She wasn't my stepmother or my father's wife. She was just someone standing on the edge of a truth she didn't want to name. Finally, she stood, gathered the glasses, and said, "Good night, Owen." The way she said my name made my stomach turn. It wasn't guilt or anger. Just the ache of something breaking where no one could see. Over the next few days, my thoughts split into parallel lines. One living the surface of my life, emails, errands, normalcy, and the other tracing her movements like a silent detective. She went for walks at odd hours, sometimes at dusk, sometimes after midnight. Once, I followed her car at a distance. She drove toward the outskirts of town, stopped near a small park, and sat there without getting out. I waited, watching from the next street, until she finally turned back. When she pulled into our driveway, I killed my engine and waited 5 minutes before entering. She was in the kitchen, making tea again, the normalcy of it almost unbearable. "You should try sleeping," she said when I appeared. "You too," I replied. Our words circled each other like tired fighters, too aware of the blows they couldn't afford to land. The breaking point came on a Thursday. I came home early again. The house was quiet, except for a faint sound from her office. Not a voice this time, just music. A slow piano piece, soft enough to make the air feel thoughtful. I stepped to the doorway. She was sitting at the desk, her back to me, writing. The white box was open. A half-finished letter lay on the blotter, the red ink fresh. "Lila," I said before I could stop myself. She jumped slightly, then turned. "Owen, you scared me." "I'm sorry," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. Her eyes darted toward the letter, then back to me. "Do you need something?" "Yes," I said. "I need to understand." Her hand trembled over the paper. Understand what? Who you're writing to. The air between us was so still it seemed to thicken. She looked down at the letter, then at me. You shouldn't have to carry that question, she said quietly. But I already do. Something shifted in her, acceptance, maybe, or fatigue. She folded the paper once, twice, until it was a small, pale square. Then she held it out. I was going to destroy this one, she said. Maybe it's better if you read it. I didn't move. She placed it on the desk. I'm not who you think I am, she said. But not for the reasons you think. Then she left the room. I stood there for a long time before picking it up. The letter began without greeting. Some secrets are a way of keeping others safe. Some are just waiting for the courage to stop pretending they are. He doesn't know the whole truth about the accident. I thought I could keep it that way. But I can't anymore. If Owen finds this, tell him the fault wasn't his. The accident. I felt something hollow out inside me. My hands went cold. There had been an accident years ago, when I was 17. My father's car, the rain, the wrong lane. I remembered fragments, the flash, the glass, the sound of someone crying. Lila had been the nurse who stayed with me in the hospital. Before she and my father ever became anything. She had said I'd fallen asleep. My father said it wasn't my fault. No one ever told me who the other driver was. Now the edges of memory rearranged themselves into a new shape, one where her guilt wasn't about love, but about something older, deeper. I folded the letter again, feeling its weight. Outside, I heard her voice. Owen? I turned. She stood in the doorway, eyes wet but steady. You read it? Yes. Then you know, she said. It was his son, Ren, the man I write to. He's the one who died that night. The room tilted. I couldn't breathe. My mind clawed at timelines, details, the impossible coincidence. He was the other driver? I whispered. She nodded. I never told your father. I tried to write it away. I thought I could give it somewhere to live besides my mouth. And you kept writing to him. Her voice broke. Because I took something from him, Owen. His life. His name. His future. Writing was the only way I could keep him alive long enough to say sorry. For a moment, the room felt too small for both of us. I looked at the letter, at her face, at the fragile thing between us that used to be normal. Does he, my father, know anything? I asked. She shook her head. He thought you fell asleep. I let him believe it. Maybe I wanted him to. It made us both less guilty. Silence filled the room. Not empty, thick, alive, breathing with everything unsaid. Finally, I said, then what happens now? Lila looked at the open window, where wind toyed with the curtain's edge. Now? She said quietly. Now the house knows. That's usually when things start to break. That night, I couldn't sleep again. But this time, I didn't listen for her footsteps. I listened for the sound of truth finding its way through walls. The house was still. The white box was still open. And somewhere between guilt and mercy, a new kind of silence settled in, the kind that doesn't ask for forgiveness, only endurance. The first letter didn't mean anything until it bled. It wasn't real blood, just a thin smear of red ink that had pooled under the cursive loop of a name that wasn't my father's. I hadn't meant to see it at all. I'd come home early because the office's server died and my boss told us to go home before anyone said something regrettable. I was still halfway annoyed and halfway relieved when I pushed our front door open and stepped into a hallway that smelled like lemon oil and rain. There was mail on the console table by the mirror, an ordinary, boring stack, except for one envelope tucked beneath a folded catalog. Like a child playing hide and seek with bad instincts. It had her handwriting. It was addressed but not stamped, sealed but not mailed. The red ink pressed harder where she'd written the name. And the rest swallowed by the flap. My stepmother had always written like someone who believed letters could do what people fail to do, reach. I slipped the envelope free, meaning only to read the addressee. The catalog's glossy edge hooked the ceiling line and opened it almost harmlessly, almost. The red ink smudged, just a little. I told myself I'd slide it back and pretend nothing happened. I told myself I didn't even care. I cared enough to look. Resolved to, Ren. Not my father's name. Not anyone in our family's small orbit. And inside, because once the mouth of a secret opens you don't know how to close it, there were 2 pages, the first beginning with a phrase that made my hands go light and cold. I can't breathe in this house unless I write to you. It was my stepmother's voice on paper, careful, apologetic. More honest than she let herself be when she set the table and asked me how work was. I read 3 lines, maybe 4. My mind refused to be sure. Then I heard the garage door groan and the muffled clatter of her keys in the mudroom. My body moved on some terrified autopilot, letter back into the envelope. Envelope into the catalog, catalog slid under the stack again. A deep breath. Another. Then I turned toward the kitchen and pretended to be mesmerized by a bowl of oranges. "You're home early," she called, cheerfully. As if this house were a radio station with only one playlist. "So are you," I said, not turning. I could feel the letter behind me like heat through a thin wall. She walked past me, smelling like rain and soap. And touched the back of my shoulder in that gentle way she'd adopted the year she married my father. She wasn't a demonstrative person, but she tried. She tried so hard it occasionally felt like standing next to a small, earnest lamp, warm. Slightly out of place, doing its best in a room that preferred shadows. Her name is Lila. I've called her by her first name since I was 14. When my mother left and my father fell in love again. He asked if I'd call Lila, Mom, and I told him no, and he said that was okay. And Lila pretended it didn't hurt. You could track the years of our family by the things we didn't say. She put her toe down, shook out her umbrella over the sink. And checked the stove knobs like she always did, even if no one had cooked. "How's your day?" she asked. "The server died," I said. I told her about the chaos, the sprint to nowhere. The way everyone had tried to look busier than they felt. I didn't ask about her day. If I asked, I would be inviting her voice to fill the room. And I wasn't ready to listen to it after reading those first lines. "Poor thing," she said, and I couldn't tell if she meant me or the server. She reached into the cupboard for glasses and paused, fingertips hovering. "Oh, I almost forgot," she said, more to herself than to me, and crossed to the hall. A beat later, I heard the paper rustle, the pause of a body discovering a small wrongness. When she returned, her face looked like it always did, composed, polite. Crowned with that amber bob she pretended wasn't carefully maintained. But I saw it, one fraction of a second in her eyes, that animal glint of calculation. The letter had been moved. She knew. I knew she knew. I didn't know what to do with the knowledge that now we both knew. "Do you want iced tea?" she asked, as if the world were still obedient. "Water's fine." We moved through the choreography, the glass, the ice clink. The wedge of lemon she adds because she believes small touches alchemize into care. I thanked her because that's part of the dance. The rain thinned to a whisper against the window panes. Somewhere, a neighbor's dog barked at the idea of thunder. I didn't touch the catalog again. Not that night. Not after my father came home, heavy with the end of his week, and took her waist in his hands like he was allowed to. Not while we ate the rotisserie chicken he'd picked up and pretended it was something he'd made. I watched them talk around each other, watched their sentences swerve, touching only occasionally like the last cars of a train sliding past in opposite directions. I thought of the letter sleeping under the catalog and of the name, Ren, which felt like a stone slipping into a pond somewhere I couldn't see, sending rings toward me regardless. When I was 15, my father framed the first baseball I ever caught at a foul line. I didn't even catch it, not really. It ricocheted off someone's shoulder and landed in my open hand while I was busy thinking about whether a person could feel lonelier in a crowd than in an empty room. At home that night, Lila made spaghetti and told me it was good luck. My father took the ball in his palms like it might hatch and said, "We'll keep this where we see it." He put it on the mantel, next to the family photo from a Christmas rental in Tahoe where the snow felt rented, too. In that picture, my mother is a ghost edged in light. She had already decided to leave. Lila isn't in that picture. She came after the snow, after the ghost. After my father learned how to smile without showing his teeth. Lila came with her own pictures, the ones of her and my father on walks, at farmers' markets. Wide-angled and sun-glossed. A few of me at the margins, hunched and trying not to blink. One of Lila alone, in a pale blue dress at a wedding that wasn't ours, looking off frame like someone had just called her name from the future. She also came with rituals. She believed in tidy drawers, open windows, the sanctity of handwritten notes. There's a white lacquered box on her desk filled with cards in envelopes. Each envelope addressed before it's written. As if the destination matters more than what you're brave enough to say. At first I thought it was quaint. Then I thought it was sad. Then I stopped thinking about it at all. The way you stop hearing a dripping faucet until someone else points it out. After the letter, the faucet roared. You can love two people at once. That's what some people say when they're trying to explain a crack they can't repair. But there's another version, the one that doesn't get framed or forgiven. You can love one person and use another like a hallway. You can build a life that looks like a house and then write to someone else to breathe. I didn't know which version lived in our walls yet. I just knew about a letter, ink smudged, not mailed. I had a name, Ren. I had the certainty of Lila's eyes, bright and too still. I had the physical reaction of my own body, the itch in my throat. The sweat rising with no heat, the way I kept wanting to clear my voice as if words were lodged there, unsaid and sharp. I told myself it could be nothing. I told myself, Ren could be a woman from her book club, or a second cousin I'd never heard of. Or some name in a charity file. I told myself people write to people for 1,000 reasons that have nothing to do with betrayal. I told myself, and my body didn't listen. That night I dreamed I was 12 again. Walking through our old house with a glass of water that never sloshed. As if the surface tension had a will. I walked past the living room where my mother sat on the floor wrapping presents that weren't for me. I walked past the office where my father pretended the door closed by itself. I stood at the top of the stairs and listened to my name being said by people who weren't there. When I woke, I had my nails dug into my palms, half moons throbbing. As if pain could right itself. The next day, Saturday, Lila went to the farmer's market like she always did in a dress that made her look more composed than the rest of us. I waited 15 minutes after she left. I told myself I was staying home to do laundry. I told myself I was not the kind of person who goes through other people's things. Then I went into her office. Her office smells like paper and patience. She keeps a narrow vase of eucalyptus on the shelf, a low hum of mint and something brighter. The white lacquered box sits centered on the desk, exactly where she likes it. The lid lifted without a sound. Inside, the usual, cards with watercolor flowers, tasteful sympathy notes. Birthday cards that could pass for congratulations at a graduation and vice versa. But beneath those, in the bottom layer, lay another stack. Each envelope had red ink. Each was addressed to Ren. Some had stamps, some didn't. None had been mailed. I touched one with the back of my fingers, the way you touch a forehead to check for fever. As if skin is a thermometer for truth. I took the top one. I unfolded it slowly, punishing myself with the ritual. A dried petal fluttered out and died again on the desk. Ren, it began. You said once that secrecy is a kind of violence. I keep telling myself this isn't secrecy. It's containment. It's choosing not to set fire to the wrong room. That was the line that lifted a sound out of me I didn't recognize. It was a laugh, but not the kind anyone would join. I pressed my fingers into my eyes until small stars trembled there. I forced myself to read the rest. And what I read wasn't the pornographic story of anyone's body. It was a litany of small exits. It was the terrain of a life lived with exits pre-planned. I don't tell him when I can't sleep because he will think it's about money. I don't tell Owen when I can't breathe because he will think it's about his mother. My name, there. A parenthesis of me. When I think of you, I'm calmer. It's like remembering there's a door somewhere, even if I never open it. My chest made a bright, painful silence. She'd decided I was a reason to lie. It was an act of kindness, maybe, in her story. In mine, it was a theft, of air, of certainty. Of the belief that we were at least honest about the absence of easy answers. In the second paragraph, she wrote about the day last spring when the peonies flopped under their own theater and I said they look like congratulations cakes. She said the word tenderness, and then crossed it out and wrote mercy above it. And then left the cross out visible, an artifact of someone arguing with herself. She wrote about driving aimlessly after the dentist and watching rain haze the taillights like a film had slipped between her and the real. And she wrote the sentence that burrowed into me deeper than the start. I am not lying to him. I am lying near him. It was not what she did. It was the grammar she chose, the near and the not. I didn't finish the letter. I couldn't. My skin felt overlit. My ears hissed. I put the page back into the envelope, tucked it under the stack exactly as I'd found it. Then misaligned it by a millimeter because I hated that precision belonged to her. On my way out, my elbow clipped the edge of the desk. The white lacquered box slid, thumped softly, and the desk lamp chimed with the smallest sound. My father's baseball on the bookcase rolled half an inch in its stand and came to a stop. Pointed toward me, its scuffed seam like a mouth about to speak. I closed the door and fell onto the hall rug. The cheap runner with triangles Lila swore were subtle. I pressed my hands flat up my face and exhaled hard. As if I could fog up reality and write something else on it. That's when my phone buzzed. A message from Lila. Do you want peaches? They're perfect today. I stared until the words unhooked from meaning. Until peaches looked like a lie someone invented to make summer feel safe. My thumbs moved without me. Sure. Get a few. A minute later. Okay, smiley face. The smallest smile, the least threatening face. I wanted to crush the phone. I wanted to drive to the market and stand in front of her and ask, "Who is Ren?" I wanted to throw the lacquered box in the street and watch the envelopes kite themselves into the sky. I wanted to do nothing and wait, and wait. And let the waiting rip me quiet. Instead, I went to the kitchen for water and found, resting on the counter by the fruit bowl, a second envelope. No red ink. No address. Only my name written in Lila's careful hand. A whole landscape shifted. I tore it open with my bare fingers, forgot the neatness. Inside was a single sheet and a photograph, the kind printed at the drugstore in a matte finish, chosen by people who fear gloss. The sheet carried one sentence: "If you find this first, please read the back of the photo." The photograph showed my father the way fathers quietly prefer to be seen. Caught in an unremarkable task, handsome because he wasn't trying. He was at our backyard grill last summer, flipping corn as if the world could be managed with tongs. In the background, framed between two beams of the porch, was the smallest sliver of Lila's face. She was out of focus, laughing at something beyond the frame. If you didn't care, you would not notice it. On the back, in pencil, it said, "He was happy here. I need you to remember that, whatever happens." My throat shut. The room leaned. I heard the garage door again in my mind, like a memory that refuses to stay caged. The house's air felt different, just a shade heavier. As if good weather were about to become weather. The sound of tires on wet gravel came from the driveway. Lila was home early, carrying a bag of peaches that were supposed to be perfect. A smile she could keep up indefinitely, and a story she could no longer keep to herself. Something had transitioned, the kind of click you hear in a lock even if you're across the hall. I slid the note back into the envelope with my name, placed it exactly where I'd found it, and picked up a dish towel because I needed my hands to be doing anything other than trembling. The front door opened. The smell of rain came for us again. Lila stepped in, shook her shoulders, and closed the door behind her like someone bracing a room against wind. "Peaches," she announced, lifting the bag the way a stage magician lifts an innocent prop. She set them on the counter and reached for the kettle. "Tea?" I watched her, the easy way she moved, the practiced kindness. I felt the letter in the hall like a pulse. I felt the photograph in my pocket because I hadn't put it back. I realized I had made a choice without letting my mind vote. "Tea," I said, surprised at how steady I sounded. My heart was a small animal caught between truck and field. "And then I need to ask you something." The kettle's switch clicked, a clean, inevitable sound. Lila looked at me. For a second, a real second, she didn't pretend not to know what I meant. Something vulnerable crossed her face. Something like relief or surrender. Or the end of a sentence she'd been writing in red ink for months. "Okay," she said. We stood there, three of us if you count the truth, me, Lila, and the bag of peaches ripening into sweetness that felt, all at once, like an accusation. The house held its breath. Somewhere in the living room, the framed baseball shift clicked microscopically in its stand, as if even the past was trying to square itself. And then the kettle began to sing. For 3 days, the house lived in suspension. We moved around each other like two halves of a broken plate, edges sharp, never aligning. My father came home from his trip early. He said the conference was a waste of time. He kissed Lila on the forehead and told her she looked tired. She smiled. She always smiled. Only I could see that it was a mask molded too tight. I watched them talk that evening from the hallway. The kitchen light cutting them into separate halves. My father was telling a story about an old friend, and Lila was nodding. Responding just enough. The sight of them together felt wrong now. As if reality had slipped its seams and kept moving without noticing. I couldn't unknow what I knew. Ren wasn't a lover. He was a ghost, a boy my age who had died in a crash I survived. Lila had been the nurse who carried that guilt home and built a life from it. And yet, the letters, the tenderness, the secrecy, it still felt like betrayal. Only rewritten in a different ink. The accident didn't wait for a metaphor. It happened on a Tuesday night, just after dinner. The rain had returned, heavy, impatient. My father and I were arguing, not about anything important. The kind of small argument that fills a house when everyone's trying to avoid the real one. He wanted me to help him fix the motion light outside. I said it could wait. He said I was always waiting. I said he was always pretending things weren't broken. The last thing I remember before the noise was his hand slamming the door on his way out. Then, the scream of tires, a thud, silence. I ran outside. The rain was wild, blinding. The motion light flickered, revealing and erasing in turns. My father's car had rolled halfway down the driveway. Lila stood by the front steps, pale, motionless, one hand to her mouth. My father was on the ground beside the open driver's door. I dropped to my knees. He was breathing, barely. A ladder lay twisted nearby. Knocked from where it had been propped against the side of the garage. Call 911, I shouted. Lila didn't move. She was staring past me, at something I couldn't see. Her voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. It's happening again. The ambulance came fast. They stabilized him, said concussion, said observation. Said he was lucky. Lila rode with him. I followed in my car, windshield wipers losing the race against the storm. At the hospital, the same hospital where I'd woken years ago after the first accident, I sat in a plastic chair that groaned each time I moved. The smell was the same, antiseptic and fear. Lila came out after an hour. He's stable, she said. Her voice was distant, fragile. They're keeping him overnight. Good, I said. But her eyes weren't on me. They were fixed somewhere behind her. In the direction of the trauma ward. When she finally spoke again, her words seemed pulled from somewhere deep and unwilling. The same doctor, she said. The same one from before. I didn't know what that meant until I followed her gaze and saw him. The man from the cafe. He was older now, lined in the way grief etches a face. When his eyes met hers, recognition flared like a wound being reopened. He came closer, cautious but certain. Lila, he said. His voice was low. But the sound of her name was enough to make my chest tighten. She didn't speak. I stepped between them without meaning to. You're Ren's father, I said quietly. He looked at me, really looked, and nodded. And you must be Owen. The hallway tilted. The hum of hospital machines filled the silence. He turned back to Lila. You should have told me. Lila's lip trembled. What good would it have done? I spent years wondering if you even remembered him, he said. And then one day I find your name in a directory. Realize you married the man whose son was behind the wheel. He stopped, swallowing hard. I thought fate was cruel. Now I'm not sure it isn't deliberate. Don't, she whispered. Not here. People were looking now. A nurse glanced over, wary. I touched his arm. Please, I said. My father's still in there. He looked at me again, softer this time. I'm sorry. For him. For you. Then, quieter, for her. He walked away before either of us could answer. Lila sank into a chair. Her shoulders folded inward like someone trying to disappear. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to forgive her. Instead, I just sat beside her and stared at the linoleum until the world steadied. At home, the house felt haunted by what hadn't yet been said. Lila stood at the sink, drying the same glass over and over. You think I should tell him, she said. Yes, I said. He deserves to know. She shook her head. It will destroy him. Maybe it already has. She turned, eyes wide and wet. You don't understand. After the accident, your father blamed himself. Said he should have driven that night. If he learns what really happened, that I was there, that I knew, it won't just destroy him. It'll unmake everything he built to survive it. Her voice broke on the word survive. Then why marry him? I asked. She stared at me. Because I thought it would make things right. I thought I could make his life better. I thought I could love enough to balance what I'd done. And did you? She set the glass down too hard. It cracked cleanly down the middle. No, she said, you can't love someone as an apology. The next morning, my father woke. He was confused but lucid. Lila and I stood at his bedside. Silent witnesses to each other's guilt. What happened? He asked. Ladder slipped, I said quickly. He nodded, wincing. Guess I should stick to tennis. He smiled, weakly. Lila tried to smile back, but it didn't reach her eyes. When the nurse left, he reached for her hand. You look like you've seen a ghost. Lila flinched. Maybe I have. He frowned, not understanding. I couldn't stand it, the lies, the half-truths circling like vultures. Dad, I began. There's something. But Lila cut in. Not now. Her tone was soft, pleading. My father looked between us, puzzled. What's going on? Nothing, she said quickly. You need rest. Her hand stayed in his, but her eyes were begging me for silence. I walked out before I could decide which promise I was keeping. That night, I found her in the living room, sitting in the dark. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy. I can't keep it from him, I said. She didn't turn. I know. Then why? Because once it's said, it can't be unsaid. She finally faced me. You think the truth sets people free, Owen. But sometimes it just gives the pain a name. Maybe it deserves one. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she whispered, tomorrow. I'll tell him tomorrow. She stood, rushing past me, and I smelled the faint trace of her perfume, lavender and something sharper, the scent of inevitability. Morning came too fast. I drove to the hospital early, beating the traffic. But when I walked into my father's room, the bed was empty. A nurse told me he'd been discharged an hour earlier. Lila had signed him out. I called her. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. My stomach sank. I drove home faster than I should have. The driveway was empty. Inside, the house felt different, airless, echoing. On the kitchen counter lay a folded piece of paper with my name. I knew the handwriting before I touched it. Owen, I'm taking him to the lake. The one from the picture. I need to tell him everything somewhere quiet. Don't follow us. Not yet. The lake was 2 hours north. I went anyway. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was sinking behind the trees. My father's car was parked by the water. I found them on the dock, silhouettes against the amber reflection. Lila was sitting beside him, hands clasped. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't moving. just staring at the water as if it had finally spoken back. When I approached, Lila turned. Her face was pale but calm, like someone who had finished a sentence years in the making. "He knows," she said quietly. My father didn't look at me. His voice, when it came, was low. "All these years," he said. "You both carried this." "I tried to protect you," she said. He shook his head. "You tried to protect yourself." The wind moved across the water, scattering small waves. I stepped forward. "Dad." He held up a hand. "No, you don't need to explain. None of this was yours to fix." He stood, unsteady. "But I need time. Both of you, please, just give me time." He walked toward the car, slow, deliberate. The engine started. The taillights burned briefly through the dusk, then disappeared up the road. Lila stayed on the dock. She was trembling, but she didn't cry. "He's gone," she said softly. "For now," I said. She nodded. "That's what I deserve." I sat beside her. The wood was cold under my palms. "Do you still write to him?" I asked. She looked out at the water. "Not anymore," she said. "There's no one left to write to." The wind rose again, carrying the faint smell of rain from somewhere far off. I thought of Ren, of the boy whose life had ended where mine began. I thought of my father, driving alone toward whatever version of peace he could find. And I thought of Lila, beside me, small and hollow, yet still trying to hold herself upright in the wreckage. Maybe the truth didn't set anyone free. Maybe it just changed the shape of the cage. Behind us, thunder rolled distantly. Lila whispered, "I thought love could fix what guilt broke." I said, "Maybe it only teaches us how to live with the cracks." We sat there until the light went out of the lake, until the water turned black and still. And when we finally stood to leave, the reflection staring back wasn't hers or mine, just the thin, wavering outline of something we had both tried too long not to see. For weeks after the lake, silence lived with us like a tenant who paid rent in unease. My father stayed away, first a few days at a friend's cabin, then longer. No one said the word separation, but it hovered, unspoken, like humidity before a storm. Lila moved through the house quietly. She cooked, cleaned, worked. She left the windows open as if the wind could absolve her. I didn't know how to act around her anymore. Pity felt too small, anger too heavy. So we coexisted in a state of restrained gravity, bound by something neither of us chose. Survival. We had become a reluctant alliance, forged not by affection but by the weight of what we now shared. It began with the phone call. A detective from the county reached out about a few inconsistencies in the old accident report. Apparently, Ren's father, Mr. Callow, had filed a petition to reopen the case. "He believes your stepmother withheld information," the detective said. "We'd like to clarify a few details." I could hear Lila's sharp intake of breath beside me when I put the phone on speaker. "What kind of details?" she asked. "Just procedural. Who was present, the timeline, medical records, standard follow-up. But given the history, we'd appreciate cooperation." After the call ended, the air in the room felt dense. "He's coming after me," she said. "Maybe he just wants the truth." Her eyes hardened. "People say that like truth is neutral. It's not. It ruins the living to console the dead." I didn't answer. That night, I lay awake listening to her pacing down the hallway again. I realized how much of my life had been shaped by sounds like that, the quiet panic of someone trying not to exist too loudly. The next morning, she knocked on my door. "Owen, can you drive me?" "To where?" The courthouse. They want me to give a statement. She looked pale but composed, wearing a navy coat and a scarf that didn't match. Are you sure? I asked. No, she said, but I can't run anymore. I drove. Neither of us spoke during the hour-long trip. Outside, the world was still winter gray, the trees bare enough to look like sketches. At the courthouse, she walked like someone heading toward a sentence she already knew by heart. I waited in the corridor while she met with the detective. The clock's second hand made a brittle sound each time it moved. When the door finally opened, she stepped out, eyes rimmed red. What happened? He asked if I'd been in touch with Ren's father. I told him yes. He asked why I never came forward sooner. What did you say? That I didn't want to destroy another family. She paused, looking at me as if expecting judgment. He said withholding information might have been obstruction, she whispered. They could press charges. Will they? I don't know, but I need a lawyer. And just like that, the reluctant alliance was official. Over the next few days, I helped her gather papers, old insurance files, hospital forms. Fragments of the past she had tried to bury. We sat at the dining table surrounded by manila folders. The same table where we once pretended to be normal. She handed me a stack of letters, some addressed, some not. They might ask about these, she said. I hesitated before touching them. Do you want me to read them? Her shoulders tensed. If you can stomach it. I opened one at random. The handwriting was softer now, less steady. I keep thinking about the moment before, the second when everything was still possible. How one heartbeat can divide a life into before and after. I didn't mean for either of us to become the after. I folded it carefully, slid it back. They won't understand, she said quietly. Then we'll help them try, I said, surprising both of us. She looked at me, really looked, and for the first time since the lake, her eyes softened. Why are you helping me? Because if you fall, he'll fall too, I said. And I can't lose both. She exhaled, a trembling sound halfway between gratitude and grief. A week later, my father returned. He didn't call ahead. The sound of the garage door startled us both. He stepped inside with a small duffel bag, face weathered but calm. Can we talk? He asked. Lila stood still, as if unsure whether she was invited into her own home. They sat in the living room. I hovered by the doorway, too close to leave. Too distant to belong. I saw the detective, my father began. He asked if I knew you'd been there that night. I said I didn't. Now I do. Lila's voice cracked. I never meant. I know what you meant, he said quietly. But meaning doesn't erase consequence. She lowered her head. I'll accept whatever comes. He shook his head. That's not what I want. I just need to understand, why me? Why us? Her eyes lifted to his. Because you were kind. Because you believed in good things. Because I thought if I loved you enough, it would count for something. He laughed softly, but without humor. And does it? She hesitated. Not the way I hoped. He looked at her for a long time, then at me. You're helping her? Yes, I said. Then we're all in it, he said. For better or worse. That was the beginning of our uneasy truce, 3 people orbiting one catastrophe. Trying not to collide. The pressure built slowly, like steam behind walls. Outwardly, we became a team. Meetings with lawyers, interviews with investigators. Carefully coordinated statements. But inside, we were cracking along invisible lines. My father started drinking again, quietly, just enough to blur the edges. Lila stopped sleeping. Her eyes ringed with exhaustion, and me, I became the bridge between them. carrying their guilt like weight plates balanced across my chest. One night, after another long silence at dinner, my father spoke. "Do you ever think about him, Ren?" I asked. He nodded. "Sometimes I try to picture his face. The other driver. The boy who never got to grow old. And then I realize I've been avoiding mirrors because I might see him looking back." Lila flinched. "Please don't." He looked at her. "You think silence keeps us safe. It doesn't. It just rots slower." Her fork slipped from her hand and clattered onto the plate. That night she didn't come to bed. The turning point came 2 days later. The detective called again, this time for me. He wanted to confirm a detail about the night of the accident. "You told paramedics you don't remember falling asleep at the wheel," he said. "But your toxicology report showed a mild sedative in your system." I froze. "What?" "Traces of zolpidem, sleep medication." "I never took anything." "Maybe not intentionally," he said. "But someone prescribed it." My mind flashed to the hospital room, the pills Lila gave me for pain, the way she'd said, "These will help you rest." When I hung up, my hands were shaking. I went to her. She was in the garden, trimming dead stems from the rose bushes. "Did you drug me that night?" I asked. She dropped the shears. The question hung between us like static. "I gave you half a pill," she said finally. "You hadn't slept in days. I thought." "You thought what?" "That it would calm you. That you wouldn't drive." "But I did drive," I shouted. Her face crumpled. "You were already halfway to the door. You wouldn't listen. I thought it would just make you tired enough to stop. I didn't think." "Exactly," I said bitterly. "You didn't think." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't move toward me. "It was my fault," she whispered. "I've known that from the beginning. I just didn't know how to live with it." The sound of my father's footsteps behind us made both of us turn. He had heard everything. He looked at her with an expression I couldn't read. Shock, maybe pity, maybe resignation. "So that's the missing piece," he said quietly. "You tried to stop one tragedy and created another." Lila's voice broke. "I was trying to save him." "You can't save people from themselves," he said. "You can only stand beside them when they fall." He turned and walked back into the house, leaving the screen door swinging behind him. Lila sank to her knees among the roses, her hands trembling over the thorns. I wanted to leave her there. I wanted to comfort her. I did neither. I just stood, the air thick with the scent of cut stems and rain-soaked soil. Realizing that every secret has layers, each peeled back only to reveal another wound beneath. That night, I packed a small bag. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay in a house built entirely of aftermath. Before I left, I slipped one of her letters into my jacket, the last one she wrote but never mailed. It ended with a line that felt like a prophecy. "Maybe forgiveness isn't a place we reach. Maybe it's just the direction we keep walking when everything else collapses." I locked the door behind me and stepped into the dark. The sound of my footsteps merging with the low wind. Somewhere inside, the two people who had shaped my life were still sitting in the ruins of what love once promised to fix. But outside, beneath the uncertain stars, I felt something shift, not redemption, not release, but the faint beginning of motion. Maybe that was enough. I left the house to escape them. But the truth came with me. It rode in the car's back seat like a passenger who refused to speak. I drove north again, without music, following the same highway that had once carried us to the accident. Every curve of asphalt felt haunted. Rain slicked the windshield, and headlights fractured across the glass like nerves under skin. By dawn I was back at the lake. The water was gray, quiet. The dock where everything had changed still stretched into the mist. I sat there for a long time, the letter I'd stolen from Lila's desk folded in my pocket like an unspent confession. I wanted distance, but what I found was weight, the weight of every lie stacked until the air itself began to tilt. A few days later, the detective called again. "Owen, can you come in? There's been a development." At the station, he handed me a file, the reopened investigation, freshly closed. Inside were photographs I'd never seen, and one report that twisted everything I thought I knew. "Your stepmother wasn't the only one withholding information," he said. The original bloodwork from the other vehicle was retested. The driver, Ren, had been drinking. I blinked. He was at fault? Mostly, the detective said carefully. He crossed the line first. You reacted too late. He paused, letting it sink in. The case won't go to trial. But your father was notified. And so was Mrs. Callow. Ren's mother? I asked. He nodded. She requested a meeting with Lila. We thought you should know. The floor seemed to tilt again. For years, Lila had written letters to the dead. Now she was being summoned by the living. When I returned home, both my father and Lila were waiting in the living room. The tension in the air felt metallic, like static before a lightning strike. She told me, my father said. About the test results. About everything. His eyes moved between us, exhausted, hollow, but clearer than I'd seen them in months. We've been fighting shadows, he said. It wasn't just guilt, it was ignorance. Lila sat very still. Does it make any difference? Yes, he said. It means none of us were ever completely right or completely wrong. Then he looked at me. But you should be there tomorrow. When she meets the mother. Why me? Because you're the one who still believes understanding means something, he said. And because she trusts you more than she trusts herself. The meeting took place in a church basement that smelled faintly of bleach and rain. Ren's mother, Mrs. Callow, was small, silver-haired, and dressed in a coat that looked borrowed from another decade. When she saw Lila, she didn't cry. She simply said, "You've been writing to my son." Lila nodded. Every week for 7 years. Why? Because I didn't know how to stop being sorry. Mrs. Callow's face didn't move. Do you know what it's like to talk to a grave and wonder if the other side ever hears you? Yes, Lila whispered. Every day. Mrs. Callow reached into her purse and pulled out a thin bundle of envelopes, Lila's letters. He's been hearing you, she said. You mailed some, after all. Lila's eyes widened. How? My husband intercepted them. He couldn't bear to destroy them. He gave them to me before he died last month. The words hit like cold water. I glanced at Lila, her body stiffened, her breath shuddered. I read them, Mrs. Callow said. All of them. You wrote about my son as if he were still here. You wrote about the crash, about the boy who survived. About trying to love your way back to forgiveness. She stepped closer. I came here to see if you meant it. Lila's voice trembled. I did. Every word. Mrs. Callow studied her for a long, silent moment. Then, unexpectedly, she reached out and took Lila's hands. Then stop writing to the dead, she said softly. Start living for the living. Tears spilled down Lila's cheeks, not violent, not cinematic, just quiet surrender. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. But the peace didn't last. That night, when we returned home, the house felt lighter, but only at first. My father had opened a bottle of whiskey, a bad sign disguised as celebration. To the truth, he said, pouring 3 glasses. We drank in uneasy silence. Outside, thunder was gathering again. He looked at Lila over the rim of his glass. So, what now? Do we pretend none of it happened? Go back to dinners and chores and polite smiles? No, she said. We start over. Honestly this time. And what does honesty look like to you, Lila? His voice was rising. A yearly confession? A letter on the anniversary? Stop, I said. It's over. It's never over, he snapped. You think a confession fixes a decade of lies? You think saying sorry to a stranger makes us whole? He stood, glass clattering onto the table. You didn't just lie to me, you built me out of the lie. I loved you because you let me believe I'd saved you. You did save me, she said, standing too. You just don't like the part where I needed saving. Lightning flashed outside. For an instant, the room became a photograph, white, frozen. Everyone mid-gesture. Then the lights flickered and went out. The storm roared to life. We found flashlights but not calm. The storm pressed against the windows like a living thing. Sit down, I said, trying to anchor the air. Please. But they didn't hear me. Years of repression had found its voice. My father paced, voice raw. I spent half my life trying to protect this family from ghosts. You invited one in. Lila shook her head. You think you're the only one who suffered? I woke every night hearing metal twist. I watched your son's face every morning knowing I'd helped end another boy's life. He stopped. Then why stay? Why marry me at all? Because I loved you, she said. And because I thought love could make the past behave. He stared at her, then at me. And you knew, didn't you, Owen? You knew before I did. Yes, I said quietly. His eyes filled, not with anger, but betrayal's exhausted cousin. You both kept me in the dark. I was trying to protect you, I said. That's what everyone says before they ruin someone, he muttered. The thunder crashed so close the walls shivered. In the flash of lightning, I saw him turn toward the door. Where are you going? I asked. To get air, he said. Before I drown in this house. He grabbed his coat. The front door slammed. The wind howled through the gap before it shut again. Lila moved toward the window. He shouldn't drive. He won't, I said. He'll walk it off. But the sound that followed wasn't footsteps. It was the groan of the garage door. The car engine started. Dad, I shouted, rushing out. Rain hammered down. The headlights cut through the storm as the car reversed. Tires skidding on the slick drive. Lila ran behind me, screaming his name. Then, a sickening crunch. Metal against stone. The headlights flared, then died. We reached the car. The front end had slammed into the oak at the edge of the property. The airbags had deployed. My father sat stunned but alive. Smoke curled from the hood. Don't move, I shouted, yanking the door open. He blinked up at me, dazed. Guess I didn't get far. You're lucky, I said. It could have been worse. He looked at Lila, who was crying against the rain. It's always worse, he murmured. Hours later, after the paramedics left and the storm finally relented, the three of us sat at the kitchen table again, soaked, shivering, silent. The car was ruined. So were we, maybe. But we were all still breathing. Finally, my father spoke. No more ghosts, he said quietly. No more secrets. Lila nodded. No more letters. He turned to me. And no more pretending we can fix each other. Something inside me cracked open. Pain, yes, but also release. Then what do we do? I asked. He looked around the room at the mess. At the broken pieces of a life we'd all tried too hard to keep whole. We start with the truth, he said. And see if it lets us stay. Weeks later, spring arrived, tentative, skeptical. The oak tree bore a scar where the car had hit, but new leaves had begun to form around it. Lila moved out temporarily. My father entered counseling. We talked, not often but honestly. Each word felt like rebuilding muscle after injury. One afternoon, I found the white lacquered box on the porch. Inside was one final envelope, unsealed. Owen, this will be my last letter. The past doesn't disappear. It settles. We can choose whether to live underneath it or beside it. Tell him I'm not running. Tell yourself the same. No red ink this time, just black, steady, unflinching. I placed the box under the oak, where the grass had started to grow back. The wind moved through the branches, making a sound that wasn't quite mourning and wasn't quite peace. Maybe this was what breaking open really meant, not destruction, but the sound of something finally breathing after years underground. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted, I just felt awake. Time doesn't heal, it rearranges. The weeks after the storm blurred into a kind of gentle exhaustion. The police came and went, the insurance agents spoke in numbers that meant nothing. The oak was cut back, its scarred trunk standing like a monument to everything we hadn't said. Lila's boxes disappeared from the hallway one morning without ceremony. She left a note on the counter, short, simple, polite, as if leaving for a business trip. I'll be at the cottage for a while. Don't worry about me. There was no love, no signature. Only the faint circle where her coffee cup had rested beside the paper. My father didn't ask where she went. He just nodded once and said, "She'll need time." I wanted to ask how much time forgiveness took, but I didn't. The house began to sound different. No footsteps at midnight, no kettle whistling after dinner, no letters being written in the room at the end of the hall. At first, the silence felt like relief. Then it became something else, an ache that vibrated at the edge of ordinary moments. My father and I developed a rhythm. We fixed small things, the porch railing, the flickering light, the dented mailbox. He cooked sometimes, I pretended to like it. We didn't talk about Lila unless it was unavoidable. One evening, he found her gardening gloves still hanging by the door. He looked at them a long time before saying, she always hated weeds. But she'd never pull them all out. Said some things deserved to stay if they fought hard enough to grow. That was the first time I saw him smile without bitterness. I visited her cottage 2 weeks later. It sat by the same lake where everything had started to fall apart. When I knocked, she opened the door slowly, as if expecting a ghost. "Owen," she said, soft as a question. She looked thinner, her hair pulled back in a loose knot, her eyes tired but clear. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I almost didn't," I replied. She stepped aside, letting me in. The place was small but clean, windows open, curtains moving in the lake breeze. A kettle simmered on the stove, of course. "You still make tea for company," I said. "Old habits," she smiled faintly. We sat by the window overlooking the water. The silence between us wasn't sharp anymore, it had edges worn down by time. "I heard about the car," she said quietly. "Is he all right?" "He's better," I said. "Seeing someone. Talking helps, apparently." "That's good." She looked down at her hands. "And you?" I shrugged, still figuring out what better means. She smiled sadly. "That makes 2 of us." For a while, we just listened to the lake. Then I asked, "Do you miss him?" "Every day," she said. But not in the way I expected. It's not regret, it's recognition. Like seeing a part of myself I can finally look at without flinching. She turned toward me. You hate me less now, don't you? I never hated you, I said. I just didn't know how to carry what you gave me. Her eyes glistened. And now? I'm still carrying it, I said. But it doesn't feel like poison anymore. She nodded, wiping a tear. That's all I ever wanted, for you to survive it. We drank tea, and for the first time, it didn't taste like guilt. Before I left, she handed me a small box, wooden this time, not white. I've been writing again, she said. But not to him. To myself. I opened it later, at home. Inside were folded notes, each starting with Dear Lila. And ending with I forgive you. It was both humbling and unbearably human, watching someone rebuild herself one sentence at a time. I didn't tell my father about the box. It wasn't his to know. That spring, the oak began to bloom again. Green shoots unfurled from the cracked bark, stubborn and alive. One Saturday morning, my father called me outside. Look, he said, pointing to a bird's nest tucked in a fork of the branches. New tenants, I said. Guess the old ones moved out, he replied. His smile this time was real, small and careful, but real. We stood there a while, the sun filtering through the leaves. For once, it didn't feel like the light was trying too hard. Months passed. Summer came soft and slow. The lawyer closed the file. The detective stopped calling. Life didn't go back to what it was, it never could, but it became something livable. Sometimes, I'd see my father on the porch at sunset, reading. He'd underline passages in the margins, muttering to himself. When I asked what book it was, he said, something about grief. I like when words fail to make sense, it feels honest. We didn't talk about Lila much, but he kept her gloves on the hook. When I offered to put them away, he shook his head. They can stay, he said. Reminders don't have to hurt. In late August, she called. I thought you should know, she said, I'm leaving the cottage. I'm going back to work. New town, new start. That's good, I said. You sound lighter. I am, she said. Thank you, for not hating me. For still answering the phone. I think that's what forgiveness is, I said. Answering anyway. She laughed softly, that small, familiar laugh. Take care of him for me. You should tell him that yourself. Maybe one day. And then she was gone, the line quiet but not empty. Autumn came, and with it, a strange kind of peace. The house no longer felt haunted. It just felt old, honest, lived in. One night, my father and I sat by the fire. He poured 2 cups of coffee instead of whiskey. Do you think people can start over? I asked. He thought about it. No, he said, but they can continue. Which might be better. He leaned back, eyes reflecting the flames. Your mother once told me forgiveness was just memory without the weight. Maybe that's what we're learning to do, remember lighter. I didn't answer, but I thought about Lila's box, about the oak. About the cracks that hadn't healed but had filled with light. For the first time in a long while, I felt steady. Weeks later, I visited the lake again. The water was calm, almost mirror smooth. On the dock, I found something. A sealed envelope weighed down with a small stone. My name on the front, Lila's handwriting, black ink. Owen, I once believed letters could fix what silence broke. Now I know they're just echoes, soft reminders that something once mattered. If you're reading this, it means I've finally stopped writing. Thank you for letting me go. Be kind to the next version of yourself, L. I read it twice, then once more. The paper fluttered in the wind, light as breath. I didn't take it with me. I left it on the dock, where the lake could decide what to keep. As I walked back to the car, the sky began to break open in color, orange, pale gold, and the soft kind of blue that feels like forgiveness. I thought of everything that had brought us here, the letters, the secrets. The crashes, both literal and emotional. All of it had led not to closure, but to clarity. Some stories don't end, they just stop needing to be told. That evening, my father asked me to dinner. We ate quietly. No tension, no pretending. Just two people who had outlasted the worst version of themselves. When the plates were cleared, he said, "You know, I don't dream about the accident anymore." "Neither do I," I said. He smiled. "Guess that's progress." Outside, rain began to fall again, soft, not violent. The kind of rain that cleans instead of ruins. I watched it beat against the glass, and for once, I didn't flinch. The world didn't feel lighter, but I did. And when I finally went to bed, I slept. Not the fragile sleep of denial, but the kind that comes when you've looked straight at the wreckage and chosen, finally, to keep living anyway. In the morning, sunlight spilled across the floorboards. The house creaked, breathing. Somewhere beyond the yard, a bird sang, a simple sound, unremarkable, but alive. I stood by the window, hands in my pockets, and whispered to the quiet room. "We're still here." And for the first time, the silence didn't answer back. It just listened.